Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary.
The year is 3013. The galaxy is scintillating in the mellow light. Two galactic pilgrims seek out vistas in the samurai future to bring forth the unity of the cosmic shaman. Opening the door of the pantheon of mystics, the evil sorcerer wizard powers the engine of science, seeking to forever alter the sacred balance, travelling on effervescent balls of summer fire.
This week, Interstellar.
In the year 2019, we saw a black hole for the first time. Unless you'd been watching Interstellar.
Or the black hole, we did that too. That one was...
Yeah, but that one kind of looked like some water.
Yes, we are trying to get into something a little more like a real black hole for this one, of course. So, this is today's movie, Interstellar, is a very smart movie. So we need to have some very smart people to help us through this gargantua black hole. So, first off, this is Matt.
This is Luke.
And welcome to the
Sci-Fi Sanctuary.
There, I gave it all to you. And we do have a guest today. We are joined by someone who is an astrophysicist, aerospace engineer, and now a scientific consultant. Dr. Erin Macdonald went out to LA a few years ago and is now doing scientific consulting on, it's all of Star Trek, is it?
It's all of Star Trek.
That's impressive. Yes, that's cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Always happy to geek out about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this, of course, is not a Star Trek film, but it's about as Star Trek as any sci-fi is going to get. I would argue this one's probably a little more Star Trek than Star Trek often is.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong.
But I guess we'll talk a little bit about how we came across this film. I live in Ueda, Japan. This is the first film I saw when I first got here permanently, and I said it with Inception too. Something I really like about Nolan films is he's pretty good at keeping you completely blind as to what you're getting into until you enter the theater. This is supposed to be our Nolan month, and we are hoping to see Tenet at the end of this month and get into that if theaters and things work out. But I have no clue what Tenet's going to be about, other than I know a few actors in it. So I was definitely blown away by this movie, seeing it it was the first movie I'd seen in a theater for about 6 months too, so that was kind of nice. Luke, how about you?
So yeah, before this movie, I liked Nolan, but I wouldn't say I was a big Nolan fan. I don't think I even managed to see it in theaters. When it came out on disc, I got a copy, and I sat in my apartment with the lights off in my chair. And absolutely adored it. Watched it again, I think, 1 or 2 nights later, or maybe again within a week of that. I really loved this film. And yeah, it was since then I've become super excited for the next Nolan. But yeah, because I liked Inception, I really liked The Prestige. Of course, I enjoyed the Batmans, and I'd heard he was working on a space movie, so I was like, okay, that'll probably be cool. But then yeah, I ended up really loving this film.
And Erin, this is right in your wheelhouse. So how did this one come through to you?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting with this film because it came out in 2014, and that was a big sort of year in my life for completely switching careers, because I'd worked in academia up until 2014, and I had left that spring. And the research I was doing in academia was in gravitational waves and general relativity, and one of my colleagues was the science advisor on this film. So in terms of our scientific background, people kind of knew that this was a big deal from that aspect, but then I kind of hadn't really thought much about it. But one of the things I started doing that fall, I had moved back to the States. I'd been living in the UK prior to that. I was just kind of getting settled in my new career. I was teaching part-time, And I was teaching Astronomy 101 when this came out, just as an adjunct professor, and my students would not stop talking about it and asking me about it. And so it was like I had so many other things going on in my world that I wasn't going to the theater as much as I normally would, or the cinema, but that my students kind of were just like, just go watch it, please, I just want to talk about it. Can we just talk about it? Can we just do this for a class all day, is talk about Interstellar? So, kind of through my teaching and my outreach, I had no option but to watch this film.
It does. I know for me, it's notorious on this podcast that it takes me forever to watch a film. So I tend not to get to special features. But yeah, this one just is so awe-inspiring and fascinating that I have actually watched the full-length documentary like 2 or 3 times for this one. I think I've shown my daughter the documentary, but not the movie itself.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Although I do need to put on stuff like this in Contact for too long, because she's getting to the age to actually appreciate that, and where it's it's not animated anymore, right? So we can do those films.
Right, you got to have that whole list. Yeah, my partner's kids are at that age, and so we have our whole list of movies. Contact is definitely on there, so good choice.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's basically like 2001 Contact and Interstellar for sort of like the massive, hard sci-fi flicks.
Nice.
Would anyone like to add one to that list, just out of curiosity?
See, I knew you were going to ask that question when you said that list, and now I'm racking my brain and I can't think of one.
I mean, we did Silent Running, but it lacks some of the majesty, I guess.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure I showed that one to Hannah just yet. That was pretty depressing.
Well, I'm just talking for films that are generally scientifically sort of accurate.
The Martian? I would throw The Martian on there.
Yeah, more Damon, too.
Yeah, there you go.
I will say this...
Godzilla versus the Space Monster.
Yes, definitely that one. Something that this movie's also done, I guess before I might have put this on the list, but since I've seen Interstellar, I've almost completely forgotten that gravity exists.
Yeah, that's okay.
I liked it fine, but if I want that sort of thing, Interstellar's the place for it.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mentioned not seeing Interstellar in the theatre, but still loving it. Whereas I didn't see Gravity in the theatre, and I got nothing from it.
Yeah.
That felt like, if I was in the theatre, I'd love this, but sitting at home watching it on a TV, it's just breathing.
I think I mentioned this to Luke as something we will do in the future, but this is a much smaller production, but Europa Report stands out for me, at least until the very end.
I love the Europa Report. Thank you. That is such a good movie. I'm so sad I didn't think about that, because I tell people to watch that movie all the time.
No, I mentioned The Office to Luke. Luke and I worked together, and one of our coworkers also had the same reaction, like, Europa Report, yes! So, Luke, that's in our future sooner and later, I think.
Okay, yes, put that one on the short list.
You will not be disappointed.
Anyway, I'm going to just do a quick rundown of the story here, just to catch up the listener and us for a bit, and then after that we will get a bit into the actors and the lighter thoughts. It's 50 years in the future, and America is not great again. In fact, the whole world's food supply is being taken out by blight, and the world's focus has shifted from science to emergency farming. Former NASA pilot Joseph Cooper is farming with his daughter Murph, son Tom, and his father-in-law. Unfortunately, this is a Christopher Nolan film, and his wife is dead. Murph is a bright one and works out coordinates from messages sent by what seems to be a ghost in her room. The coordinates lead Dad and daughter to the secret base of a now covert NASA. It seems that 48 years ago, a strange artificial wormhole appeared near Saturn. Astronauts ventured through to find a new world to replace the dying Earth, but now a new crew must follow up on those previous missions. Plan A is to bring Earth's inhabitants to a new home. Plan B will be to try and colonize a planet with 5,000 human embryos. Coop is instantly enlisted to fly the ship as NASA no longer has trained pilots with experience. Murph is not particularly happy that her dad is going on a mission that he may never return from. Coop enters the Earth-orbiting spacecraft Endurance with 3 scientists, including Dr. Brand, the daughter of NASA's chief scientist, and Red Shirts Dr. Romley and Dr. Doyle. Also accompanying the crew are 2 ex-military robots, TARS and Case. After a 2-year flight, the crew goes through the wormhole and begins to survey the planets orbiting Gargantua, a black hole. The first stop is Miller's planet, which turns out to be a time-dilating water world. The mission is a disaster as Dr. Doyle is swept up by the waves and ship repairs cost the crew a few hours, which translates to 23 Earth years. Back on the ship, Dr. Romley has aged most of those 23 years and has made advances in understanding gravity, but now needs actual data from a black hole like Gargantua. The next planet to choose basically comes down to a coin flip, but Coop chooses Man's planet, though Dr. Brand's choice would have been Edmund's planet, as Dr. Edmund is her old flame and the telemetry is promising. Man's planet turns out to be another hellscape that comes complete with a psychotic Dr. Mann who blows up Dr. Romley and Case and then tries to hightail it back to the Endurance. Dr. Mann then blows himself up along with part of the Endurance in a poorly executed manual docking procedure. Coop and Dr. Brand manage to get back aboard a wildly spinning Endurance and try to use Gargantua as a gravity assist to reach Edmund's planet. Coop, along with TARS, jettisons themselves into Gargantua so that the Endurance may lose mass and make it to Edmund's planet. Back on Earth, a now adult Murph works for NASA and gets a deathbed confession from the elder Dr. Brandt that Plan A is actually impossible. She returns to her childhood bedroom despondent, and so does Coop. Once Coop enters the black hole, he finds himself in a tesseract. A higher intelligence has constructed a 3D space of his daughter's bedroom stretched out through time. Coop sends his daughter messages as the ghost when she was a girl, as well as TAR's current telemetry from the black hole to the adult scientist who can now solve the gravity equations needed to save the human race. Once his goal is complete, the Tesseract disintegrates and Coop is found 58 years later floating around Saturn. He is taken to Cooper Station, named after Dr. Cooper and her advances from the black hole data. Coop has a brief reunion with his now elderly daughter, and then steals a ship and sets off for Edmund's planet, where Dr. Brand is now marooned and alone. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about the actors and I guess the fun facts here. Where is this in the reconnaissance?
So I think this is the only Matthew McConaughey film I've ever watched.
Really? No Dazed and Confused?
I don't think so. Maybe I sat through one of his rom-coms back in the day, but...
Well, he made an interesting career spin by being a very promising actor in the 90s and then making completely ridiculous things for 10 years and then coming back and just making, like, Oscar-worthy stuff. I don't think he won anything for this, but he could have. So, Jessica Chastain as well. She has won Oscars. I don't think she got one for this, but sure, why not?
The scene that does it for me is, and I think everyone says the same thing, is when he gets all the messages after they come off the water planet.
Yeah, it's an awful lot at once.
It's just sold by his reaction.
This one doesn't have quite as many ensemble folks, I think, as Nolan films do. Like, the crew is not his regulars. We have Michael Caine, but that's about... And, of course, Hathaway, I guess, now counts as... Anne Hathaway now counts as a regular for him, too, so...
Yeah, but that is pretty much it. We don't even have Cillian Murphy, which is...
surprising.
It's almost surprising not to see him at this point.
I guess he could have been Doyle.
Yeah. Yeah, Doyle's a weird one. I always look at that actor and I'm sure I know him, but he's never who I think he is.
That's what actors are supposed to be, never who you think they are.
Well, yeah, that's true, I guess. The child actors are surprisingly good in this.
Yeah, actually, yeah, because it's like you barely think of that as being not... it's kind of surprising. I looked at the mark where Jessica Chastain actually shows up, and it's just short of halfway through the entire film when she makes her first appearance on screen.
But it feels like that is the same character you're watching throughout the whole film.
And that definitely works at the end, too, where he's like basically interacting with her at two separate times at the same time. It's like, yes, this is the same person. I think she's got a similar shirt on, too, that helps.
Oh! Okay, that's very weird. So, I mean, obviously we've got the shock appearance of Matt Damon partway through. But also, the son is played by Casey Affleck.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like we've got a Damon and not quite the Affleck we're used to seeing him with.
Yeah, I know that, like I said, I came into this one very... spoiler-free, and definitely did not see Matt Damon coming until he did.
They did a great job of keeping that under wraps. I think that surprised everyone, and did for a long time. It was pretty cool.
But also, what I like about it is, although they do it as like a surprise reveal, they don't overdo it as like, here's a famous actor. He just appears, and he's just a character, and they just... let it happen. Whereas a lot of times when films try and make the twist is that this actor is in the film, it doesn't really work because, of course, that's not a twist for the characters. So they don't really try and do that here. Yeah,
he comes out of cryo sleep and there's just a brief, is that Matt Damon? And then he's, neck cut, he's got the flanking. Oh, yes, it is.
Well, at this point, I hadn't seen Matt Damon in a film for a little while. He's looking a little older, and I was like, is that Matt Damon? Is it his brother? I'm not sure.
I guess the thing with a Nolan film is there any bad acting in here? I did call the two male doctors red shirts, but it's not because they didn't have a whole lot to do. I guess Dr. Romley had 23 years to hang out and solve equations, which was helpful. But
yeah, and his scenes when they come out and he's aged are actually really good.
Erin, what would you do with 23 years on a empty spaceship?
Oh, gosh, I feel like I'm living that now. I don't think I'd last that long. It's crazy. It's a neat twist, though. I mean, I really like that they did the gravitational time dilation stuff. I think that's a fabulous use of it in science fiction.
And it's used so emotionally here. I mean, a lot of films would just be like a thing, or it'd be played not for laughs, but almost like, oh wow, it's the distant future. This is so weird. Where this movie really gets into the emotional devastation of that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said too, particularly when they're getting the videos and realizing how long time has passed, it's cool. It's good. It's a great use of like actual science in science fiction.
I feel like this film kind of does for like science fiction what The Godfather does for a crime movie, where there is a whole bunch of science stuff, but it doesn't really want you to look at that. It wants you to look at the people.
Yeah, it doesn't overshadow it. It's not saying, hey, here's all the interesting science that we did for this movie. It's very story-driven, it's not an easy balance to reach.
No, I remember there were a few... That movie actually got somewhat mixed reviews when it came out. Now I think it is pretty well considered a classic a few years later, but I do remember some of the first reviews calling it like too emotional, not like the just icy science of 2001 and the emotion ruins the movie. But I mean, we're people, so emotion, balancing the two is very important.
I do think, though, that some of that was the expectation management of it, because and you mentioned this too, the standard for Nolan is that you go into movies not really knowing what you're going to watch. And, but they did do a lot of promotion for this film around the science advising of it. I remember these articles that were coming out beforehand about Kip Thorne being the science advisor and how this was the most perfectly accurately imaged black hole that we had ever achieved. Because they had, you gave Kip Thorne the budget of a Hollywood film, and they were able to build an image of a black hole. And so I think all of that promotion around that and saying, hey, this is like, we've actually been able to simulate a black hole, which we haven't done before, gave the expectation that it would be a heavier sci-fi, like a heavier science film than it ended up being. And so that's why I think the reviews ended up the way they were, in my opinion.
Didn't the work on this film actually result in a couple of like peer-reviewed papers?
Oh yeah, and it really was because, it was purely the budget that they said, we want a really accurate black hole, and the scientists that they went to for it were like, yeah, we do too. We've wanted one for a long time, but that takes a lot of money and computing power that we don't necessarily have. And but they had the budget for it, so it was very much like a quid pro quo, very happily. It's really cool.
Just before we get off of actors and characters
Sorry.
entirely. No. Yeah. I really want to mention the two best characters in this film, Tars and Case.
Oh, yeah. I forgot to look up who voiced them. Can you double down on that?
So Tars is Bill Irwin. I don't know what else he's done. Let's have a little look-see. Yeah, it looks like he's mostly just done quite minor roles and TV roles. And then Case is not showing up because my phone is very slow. Josh Stewart, which is a name I feel like I recognize, but I don't know why.
I just asked you, kind of assuming that we were going to have like name actors voicing them, because it feels like that they're very good performances.
Yeah, they both seem to be just minor character actor voice guys.
Okay, they should get some more voice roles.
But yeah, I really enjoy those robots, design wise and the sass.
Yeah, I love the not the ratings, the percentages. Yeah, better turn your humor down to 60%. That's great.
I love how much character they managed to put into a square.
Right. Is it too optimistic? We had a few years ago, what was it? Google tried to make their own AI, which went racist within 24 hours or something?
I think that was Microsoft, yeah. They basically gave it the internet, and then it ended up being like a super Nazi. It's pretty spectacular.
So I guess Case and Tars are probably cut off from the internet then. Don't make that mistake again.
But I love when Sci-Fi is able to do that, though, and I think they did that effectively here. Other highlights are obviously 2001's and Moon, too. If you have watched or reviewed Moon, that's another really good sci-fi, actually. But it's got a great AI character in it. That's hard to do. It's hard to pull off.
Do you remember who voiced that character?
I do. I mean, I'm terrible with names. I'm legacy for being awful with names, but I know it's a big name.
No, I love Moon, and it is one we'll get to. David Bowie's son directed it, but yeah, it's the voice is Kevin Spacey.
That was it, Kevin Spacey. Yeah, that was it. But even just the way that because it obviously is calling back Hal, and they were able to do it and still make it a unique character. So. But yeah, I mean, screw Kevin Spacey. But.
No, obviously when the movie came out, it wasn't a deal. But thinking about it now, it's like ooh. But yeah, it's one we will want to talk about. I do like that movie quite well. So, Luke, was that the end of your actor rating?
Oh, and I always forget, Topher Grace is in this movie.
He's the tag along for Dr. Cooper.
But it's such a minor role, and I'm always surprised they got a fairly well known little character actor guy in for that role.
He did maybe after Venom he had to take what he could get.
Yeah, well, yeah. Now that I think about it, I've seen him in Venom, Predators, and this. So.
And then Timothée Chalamet played the young kid, the young boy, and now he's done a lot of stuff. That was kind of one of his first ones.
Oh yeah, I guess in 6 years a kid that age can grow up. So.
Yeah. I mean, he's in Little Women, Lady Bird, The King. He's starting to really grow.
Spread his wings and fly.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, we definitely have to get a little bit into the science of this, and we definitely have the person to ask today. So if I could ask you to put on a bit of the science advisor shoes, what does this film do best? I mean, we talked about the black hole a little. That's definitely a cool one, but I guess maybe details that someone who hasn't gone through academia might not spot as easily.
Yeah, no worries. So the things that I really, really like were, like I said, imaging the black hole. I can't overstate how cool that was as a general relativity person, because we live in, it's theoretical astrophysics. The most of the stuff we do is reading equations and trying to image them, but space is three-dimensional and space-time is four-dimensional, so at best we usually have things like trampolines and bowling balls and weights to condense our universe down so we can look at these really complicated equations in some way that's intuitive. And so taking the idea of a black hole and actually accurately imaging that was a really, really big deal. And that was really cool because prior to Interstellar, the most that we'd ever been able to image black holes was from the X-ray heat that was coming off of stuff as it was falling in. So before it had crossed the event horizon, it was still heating up. There's a lot of friction. And so we would get these X-ray signals. But we weren't actually able to see the black hole itself. And then since this movie came out, I mean, we've detected black holes colliding with gravitational waves. And we've got almost dozens of examples of that now. And as mentioned at the top of this, we imaged the black hole in 2019 and actually saw the picture of the hole itself. and it's one of those things that as a scientist I will get stupidly geeky about and kind of leave everyone else thinking like, why is this so, like, it's a black hole, but haven't we seen them before? And it's like, no, we haven't. We use this term all the time, but we only see like these indirect effects of black holes. And so getting something that was so mathematically accurate, being able to see it in a three-dimensional space, I think was a big deal as well. Again, just because our little dinky academic computers just can't process the level of detail that's needed for that kind of imaging. So the black hole images are like the number one thing. And then I mentioned this a little bit when I inadvertently created an entire tangent for all of us. But the gravitational time dilation I really, really love, both as a storytelling device and just an example of actual science and being used in a way that creates excellent story without making it about the science. Those are the big highlights for me.
And don't worry about tangents. When we talked about Metropolis, somehow we started talking about Azerbaijan. So
things happen.
Yes, these things happen. So the black hole is great for the 3D imaging. I guess one thing with theoretical astrophysics is none of us. We talked about the dinky computers, and our brains are dinky enough. They can never actually conceptualize a four-dimensional space.
Yeah, we just can't. It's just so hard. Because we don't live in that space, and that's the tricky thing. They have some cool throwaway examples, like using a tesseract, and then using a wormhole, both as connecting 2 points in space as well as time, is always cool. And something that we see in science fiction, but it's usually like science fiction will choose to either use black holes or wormholes as connecting 2 points in space or as connecting 2 points in time. And very rarely do they use them interchangeably, even though they do theoretically connect points in space and time. So that's kind of cool to see as well.
They have the showing the paper, like you mentioned, showing how a wormhole functions, which was actually the second time I think I saw it on film. While it's nowhere near as good a movie, I think they had the same explanation in Event Horizon.
They did, yes. Event Horizon, while it has deeply scarred me, I do like because they basically would build like an artificial wormhole type jump drive was basically what they were doing, what their ship was using, and then it punched a wormhole through, and bad, scary things happened.
No, I have a friend who will still jump behind the couch when he sees Sam Neill's face because of that movie.
Valid. I don't disagree with that at all.
And I'm going to bring him onto this podcast for that movie, too.
Awesome.
One thing I like about how you're saying, of course, we can't conceptualize a 4D space, is how in this film, the beings, they couldn't conceptualize going back to a 3D space. And like that's why they needed Coop to do it for them, which I thought was a cute idea.
Right, that is clever. Yeah, I like that a lot. Because it is, I mean, it's really hard for us. When I use examples like, that bowling ball and the trampoline to show how mass warps space-time, even that's condensed down to really 2 dimensions. And, I'd have students who just hated that and just be like, but what's under the trampoline? And it's because, we're trying to condense these dimensions down. It's really hard for us. And yeah, another great use.
So 2001 is, for the time, the science is relatively on target until we go through the Stargate and everything breaks loose. I see in this movie sort of the Tesseract being that space. How does that compare to, legit science? Are we seeing something reasonable or just wild speculation?
Well, the cool thing with the Tesseract that I like, we throw that word around in science fiction a lot. We see it in Avengers, we see Tesseract in Doctor Who, and but a Tesseract is an actual thing. It's one of these words that sounds very science fiction-y because we've seen them a lot, but it's an actual thing, and it's basically increasing in dimensions for cubes. That as you build up your dimensions, you start with a line, then you draw a square, that's your 2-dimensional square, and then you have a cube, that's a 3-dimensional one, and then a tesseract is 4 dimensions. And because our universe is 4-dimensional, with space and then time being a 4th dimension, when you bring a tesseract into it, that sort of implies very easily that you have some control over this 4th dimension of time that we don't have here. And, as mentioned, we can't really conceptualize. So making that sort of key, that unlocking aspect, be a tesseract, I'm super about. And the aliens in this were 5-dimensional, right? They lived in a 5-dimensional space in the same way we live in a 4-dimensional space. I think they were just 1 dimension greater than us, so they couldn't conceptualize 1 down from theirs. But it's cool. I love using a tesseract. I think those are great.
Yeah, I got to give a shout out to A Wrinkle in Time because I read about Tesseract in the book when I was 10 years old. So once it started showing up, I know this one seems legit, and Avengers is just using the word. I kind of got that straight up because I had first been exposed quite young.
That's awesome. Yeah, I forgot about Wrinkle in Time. The way Wrinkle in Time describes space-time and time is brilliant. Yeah.
Well, my mum is a math teacher and my dad is a physicist, so as a kid, we read Flatland, and I'm pretty sure I heard the word Tesseract from them. But I think, nice. I think in Avengers they were just embarrassed about saying Cosmic Cube out loud.
Right.
I want to say Cosmic Cube all the time. What's wrong with them?
Let us rap and declaring our love. Party season of the sun. We're coming, crashing through your paper door. But rather watch the face of God's bus god. Reality needs a mask. On webs getting spun on a tower of sun. Was never a joiner, nor a cog in the machine. Yet was rather a scribe. A firefly in the one sun tribe. Was never a joiner.
Okay, we've been nice and positive, but we're going to be a bit of a negative Nancy and ask about the things that don't work quite as well in this. I know with Gravity, for example, Neil deGrasse Tyson had like an 87-point list of things that didn't quite work in this film. Maybe it's less noticeable in Interstellar, but what are a few of those things?
Yeah, I mean, what they do great in Interstellar is they use these scientific concepts and then they make them very extreme for the point of the story. Personally, I'm a big sci-fi fan. It's very easy for me to kind of get lost in a story, and very rarely do I get pulled out. But the easiest way for me to get pulled out of a story is when a movie is being very scientific and accurate, and then they do kind of one thing that makes me pause. And for me, in this one, it was the black hole time dilation planet. As much as I will be effusive about how great it was to use that as a storytelling device, the extreme time dilation that occurred, that was what, half an hour to 7 years or something like that, was bonkers. Because essentially, like, the way black holes work is you have these green, yellow, and red zones. And a green zone, you just happily keep orbiting. I think a lot of us have this misconception that black holes are like massive hoovers that are going around vacuuming up space. And they're not. They're just really deep, deep gravity wells. And, for example, if our sun just turned into a black hole, we would have other problems, but our planet would just keep orbiting it normally if it had its same mass and everything. And so there's that green zone that we would happily be in if our sun was instead a black hole, where you just orbit like normal. Then you have those yellow zones, and the yellow zones are this area where it's like it's a little bit deeper, so it requires a little bit more fuel to stay in orbit. Like if you aren't using fuel, you will eventually fall in. But you're starting to, fall towards it, but you can still get out. And then the red zone is kind of that point where you're nearing that event horizon and just physics is starting to say no. The event horizon is that limit where light can't escape, where the escape velocity is the speed of light. But there's that area out there where any object that has mass isn't going to be able to even get to the speed of light. And so there's going to be an area where your ship won't get out of it. And for a time dilation of a half hour to 7 years, you're so deep in this red zone of the black hole, like you're never, ever crawling out of that one again. But again, this is one of those perfect examples of sacrificing the science for the sake of the story. It's never going to be as impactful if they use a more reasonable, few days, for example. That's not going to have any impact and have no emotional beat for the characters. And so making this really extreme time dilation, we'll let that slide. But that was the one time when they said, maybe it was 10 minutes. It was either 10 minutes or half an hour for 7 years. I was like, no, that's bonkers. So that kind of pulled me out a little bit.
Yeah, for the characters too, it takes them till they're on the planet to realize, wait a minute, Dr. Miller has only been here for about 30 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. That's probably something that you would want to calculate first. And I think that's probably the other thing. And I am not a negative person when it comes to science fiction. I just use all these as fun teaching moments. But, I'm not going to dunk on it completely, but, I'll be honest that there are these things where, my partner was in the Marines, and so he'll watch how military behaves in science fiction, and he will just, throw his arms up and be like, why are you allowing the pilot to go on the security mission, all that stuff. And that's kind of how I feel with some of this stuff, where I'm like, why wouldn't you calculate the gravitational time dilation? Like, that's something that's not difficult to calculate. And kind of the same thing with the overall plot of this big gravity equation to save humanity. It was not, and maybe it's just because it's been a while since I've seen it, so correct me if I just have this wrong in my brain, but all they had to do was figure out how to get humanity and enough stuff into space. And so their answer to doing that was to have this, gravity equation where they can manipulate gravity such that they're able to get all this stuff up here. And I'm like, if you're spending generations trying to figure out this equation and you're not getting anywhere, just start launching stuff into space. And like, and I know that there's all these overarching things of like how much fuel we have and all this, but I was like, you're making this problem a lot more complicated than it needs to be. But yeah, that's just me.
I think in filmmaking terms, the gravity equation is referred to as a MacGuffin.
Yes. Accurate.
But you go with it or you don't, because it's not. You see all the math on the board, so for me, I just don't know the math. But I guess the thing for me, and maybe there's a good explanation other than wizards did it or future evolved wizards did it. The wormhole and Gargantua are two separate things, and Coop is orbiting Saturn after going through the Tesseract.
Yeah.
But I mean, they were both put there by the same forces, right? So yeah. That doesn't feel like too much of a leap for me.
But you do have to kind of go with the wizard did it in the end.
Yeah, I'm with you. It kind of gives you a little bit of pause. And yeah, I mean, the equations that they show are all general relativity equations. But it's one of those, it all is just it's theoretical. And it's like, we can do the math. It's just up to the engineers to figure out how to do it. I've done the math. Over to you guys. That's the harder part. And I think, because we've done the math to figure out how warp drive works and all this stuff, but it's actually getting energy sources and getting enough power to result in that. I think that's where I know their hang-up would be. In terms of manipulating gravity, it's not that the math isn't going to let it work. It's that we need enough power and energy to warp space-time in such a way. But again, that's like where you take a step back and you're like, okay, maybe 0.5% of people are going to pick up and be mildly annoyed by that, so we'll let it go.
Well, I'm a guy who I think was dumped by his university girlfriend because she tried to teach me calculus and I didn't understand it. I'm 41 now. It was quite a while ago.
And
yeah, it sounds like you're over it, Matt.
Right.
One thing I did like about the Gravity Planet stuff was how they pointed out that for the characters, like, the theory was one thing, but it was experiencing it was like something entirely different. And I think that's the case with all of this wild space sci-fi stuff. It is very easy to think about it, but I'm sure actually, strapping yourself to a rocket and launching yourself off the Earth is very different when you actually experience it to when you just think about it.
Well, that's why you see Coop explaining to his 10-year-old daughter what's going to happen, and she's flipping out because she understands it better, right? Where he's just, I'm doing this thing, but after he goes through the experience, he's like devastated by it.
Right.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I think we see that, it's more of a subtle thing that science fiction stories use, because it's interesting. I mean, they talk about that observer effect with astronauts. Once they get up to space and are actually literally falling around the Earth, staring back at this planet that we all live on, that it does something to your brain. And you can't describe it, and you can't relate to it until you actually experience it.
Yeah, there's a quote I really like, which I think was Buzz Aldrin, but I could be wrong, where he said he could hold up his thumb and cover the Earth, but it didn't make him feel big. It made him feel very, very small.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good.
Of old science fiction films that we've watched, which I'm sure don't hold up in that sense, but which I've still had a great time watching. 2000 still sounds more futuristic to me than 2020 does. So, this film, for as much as it does visually and scientifically, I feel like this film was huge in terms of how it did music. This was like the third time Hans Zimmer and Chris Nolan reinvented film music.
Yeah, that in great part, I think it's because of all the organ stuff.
They talked a lot about how they were like, we're going for organs this time, and it's going to be different to what you're used to hearing.
There's actually a Saint-Saëns, I think I'm saying his name right, but a classical, really romantic composer. But he had one of his third symphony is the Organ Symphony, and I actually listened to it last week. And I realize whenever I see Organ Symphony, this is the music that comes to mind from this movie, not his symphony.
Right.
Because it feels very symphonic and just massive and, like a supermassive black hole.
But yeah, it's really emotional music. And it drives home the way that this feels like a very emotional film, more than like a dry scientific film.
And yeah, of course, the music is fantastic. But they almost could have just like thrown in like Bach organ and it would work just as well.
Maybe, but that music for the docking scene is like some of the best music in any film.
Oh yeah, I'm not besmirching the music at all. I'm saying it. It stands up nicely to like, a Bach organ chorale or something.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And there's one scene. This is a movie. I don't know if you've seen the Soviet Solaris. The Tarkovsky one.
No, you've told me about it many times, but I've not properly seen it.
Okay, there's a scene before the astronaut leaves the planet. It's like really long. It's like 3 or 4 minutes. It's just him sitting, watching like reeds blowing in the wind with like Bach organ piece playing. So to me, I felt like that. I mean, Nolan probably knows about it. I wonder if that influenced his aesthetic for this film and sort of the sound he wanted, and Zimmer too, I guess.
I want to tell my story of... So the famous track from this one is listed on the soundtrack as No Time for Caution. And it's just the really exciting music when he's trying to dock the ship at the end.
Yeah. Okay.
Our friend and colleague Rob is also a big fan of this film. And we were talking about it. And then so one time he was driving me home after we'd been somewhere, I can't remember where. And he had this soundtrack playing on his car. And we got to my apartment and... my apartment building has a very small, like, parking area. And for some reason, instead of just dropping me off at the road, he decided to try and reverse into there. And so as he's doing, like, really tricky, minute reversing motions, we realized that music had started playing.
that probably made it harder than it should have been.
Yeah, well, he's trying to squeeze himself into this little tiny parking spot, and it's like... Dun, 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 dun. But, like... It was like a good 30 seconds before we both realised what was happening, and then we sort of pissed ourselves for a sec.
Does he have the reverse camera?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that adds to, you get the little quote film aspect as well.
I remember when I used to work in a supermarket, and if we got deliveries, you'd stand at like the big back door, which is like the exact size as the back of the truck, and the truck would just reverse up to you, and you could walk straight in. And I'd always wanted to just film one of the trucks slowly reversing and put this soundtrack over it.
Hey, still do that. Be a YouTube sensation.
Maybe. I think I probably missed the
Yeah.
missed the zeitgeist on that one.
I don't know. Sometimes wait for the nostalgia wave to hit. But you had one more point I think you wanted to get to, or was that the music?
Just visual design. One thing which Nolan did very deliberately and which really worked, he tried to mostly shoot the space stuff the same way the camera on a spaceship would shoot it. So it's like a very tight to the ship camera.
And with they tap no sound in space in this film, so that's a plus.
Yeah.
I mean, they got the soundtrack.
We do
get
get long shots where you can see the whole spaceship. But for the most part, it's those real tight. The camera is actually on the ship.
The ship is very cool. I definitely like the shuttles. But the Endurance itself, it's not my favorite sci-fi ship. I guess it's functional, and that's cool.
It's not my favorite, but it is at least like a very unique silhouette, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, yeah, it's not my favorite, but I would probably buy a model of it.
Yeah, I did. In the beginning of the movie, they had the die-cast space shuttle model, which I remembered having as a child, and is probably still on the shelf in my parents' house in the same spot.
I'll link you to a dumb YouTube video I made in a minute. And just one last thing on this film is a piece of criticism which I've seen bandied around, which feels like I should agree with it, but I really don't because I just love this film. But this film is I'm right because I have kids, the movie. Which is like my least favourite attitude in the real world, but for some reason it doesn't bother me here.
Well, he's under a lot more pressure, too, to do that, so... Well, he's wrong, though.
I feel like it's...
He's wrong. I mean, he sees his mistakes in the end, right?
But his other thing is just that he doesn't see raising those sperm on an alien planet as being the same thing as actually saving the humans who are currently alive.
Right.
And I think that is a valid thought, right?
Well, yeah, but I'm like...
It's kind of... it's relevant to today, right? Like, a lot of people are willing to sacrifice a lot of lives to have like some theoretical herd immunity or economic gain. And like, no, you've just got to think about the actual human lives in front of you.
Well, you got to take your personal responsibility, and if it involves taking those steps, that's your personal responsibility, you know? And then that builds up to societal responsibility.
Yeah. Matt Damon makes that little point about Dr. Man. I don't know, he's just Matt Damon to me.
Matt Damon.
Which is funny because, like, Cooper is Cooper, because I don't really know Matthew McConaughey, but Matt Damon is just Matt Damon.
Okay. It actually blows my mind you don't know McConaughey that well, but whatever.
He makes that point of human beings are not designed to care about more than, like, a small number of people, the people that you can see in front of you. And it's very hard to care about, like, the world at large.
Right. So you care for yourself and make decisions as well as you can, but you don't make excuses like, I'm going to do it anyway. That's the point of personal responsibility. You don't just do it anyway. You use your compass to do what, it will benefit yourself and the people around you, and that will benefit the people around them, and so on. Yeah.
But he's so good in that villain role of, like, the whole time he's just going on and on and on, trying to justify it to himself and everyone else.
Right.
And, like, everyone would rather he just shut up and did what you needed to do.
Well, he was once a great man that's now completely psychotic.
But it really reminds me of a scene in Breaking Bad, which I won't like name any characters in case it spoils it if someone hasn't seen it. But the main character kills someone, and the guy's like there dying, and Walt's trying to justify what he's just done to this guy he's killed, and he's just like, for once in your life, we shut up. And that's what it felt like. Like, Cooper's sat, like, lying there dying, and Matt Damon's trying to make him forgive him.
Yeah, I'm doing this for you, man. I mean, it basically makes that argument.
Very satisfying when he exploded. And then... I can just say my line, you don't need to reply to it. There are two great moments in this film where it just cuts the sound. At the end of when he's watching the videos, the music just stops. And the bit where Matt Damon's like midway through a speech and he gets blown out the airlock. Those are both really like effective, unexpected stops. I like that.
don't need no rules in this time of Spartacus. We have the numbers, concentrate power in us.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, we're wrapping up a little bit. As far as does this movie stand the test of time, I don't think we have any dissenters here, unless, future science makes it all seem silly, but then the emotional content still comes through nicely.
Yeah, there are plenty of old science fiction films that we've watched which I'm sure don't hold up in that sense, but which I've still had a great time watching.
Yeah, like with 2001, some of it's a little wonky now, but at the time it was fine, so you can't really fault it. And I think this film's...
The biggest fault that 2001 has is calling it 2001.
Yeah, but isn't it funny? We can say 2001, it still sounds like the future.
Yeah.
Well,
2000 still sounds more futuristic to me than 2020 does.
2020 sounds like an eye chart. But yeah, I think we can call this one of those sort of tent pole films and hang our hat on it if we want to. Anyway, yeah, I think this podcast has come out sounding quite a bit more intelligent today, and it's not because of Luke and myself. So, Dr. Erin, can you tell them where they can, get into some of your material?
No worries. I'm really happy to have this discussion. This has been fun for me. Yeah, you can find me online. I'm mostly interacting on Twitter at Dr. Erin Mac. It's DRERINMAC. That's also my handle on Twitch and drerinmac.com, where you can find links to all of my content. And you can also search for Erin Macdonald on YouTube, where I've got recordings of my Twitch streams and various interviews, and I do sci-fi episode clubs and all this fun stuff. So thanks again for having me, and this was really fun. No,
I'm sure there's non-disclosure statements and things, so I'll just keep a very specific question. Are we going to see a lot more gravitational waves in Trek now?
At least if you do, you know who to blame. But I will say, Lower Decks is coming out on August 6th, and I didn't work on the first season, but I've seen it. I'm helping out with season 2, and I'm very excited for this. So I hope everyone enjoys it and gets to see it. It'll be great.
Is it basically Lower Decks, Discovery 3, Picard 2? Is that what we're looking at now for what we'll be watching?
I have no insight into the release schedule for this. I'm usually so far early in the development and conceptual process that by the time it's airing, I haven't thought about it in a while. But I'm very excited.
That's cool. I think just because I don't think I'd pinned down that Lower Decks date yet, so thanks.
Yeah, they announced it last week. I'm really, really excited.
And if you want to hear on other topics, science is probably more fantastic, but Pokemon are fun too. So, Luke, where do you do that?
Yep, you could. See, now you're making me sound like a real child after Erin gets to promote her really cool stuff.
But your show's fun. You have a fun show. We got to talk about it.
Yep, you can listen to my Pokemon podcast. That's on Twitter at LukeLovesPKMN. It's also on Facebook in the same place. And you can just search on your podcasting app of choice, Luke Loves Pokemon. And during this podcast, you will have heard some music. And if you like that music, what you just heard, that is made by Matt. And you can find Matt's music at rovingsagemedia.bandcamp.com.
Okay, for this podcast, I'm going to try and spit out the letters again. MLSFS pod. I think I got it. Okay, I can't spell it. Sad.
Right, yeah, you need to say, at Twitter and Facebook. You can't just shout letters.
It's a work in progress, but
yeah.
Dr. Erin Macdonald, thank you very much for joining us today in our little Mickey Mouse operation of a podcast.
Thanks, guys. This is a blast.
And Luke, how about for our dear listeners? What should they do? I put you on the spot. I put you on the spot.
Yeah, I forgot that I'm not. I keep forgetting that I've tried to stop using the horrible one that I used to use.
Spherical wormhole. Go through the. I don't know. Sorry, that's why I don't do it.
Yeah. So you, the listeners at home, can please jump in a black hole.
There we go.
Next week, Inception.